Well, hey there, folks. We are live with the Tuesday episode of the Survival Podcast. For those that follow the podcast, not just the videos, this is episode 3008. And we're going to talk today about what we're going to grow this year. And I will admit it, I'm an addict. I'm addicted to seeds. And it's been a monkey on my back for a long time. For decades, I have tried to pare down versus do more with my annual seed starting and seed selection and stuff like that. I shouldn't be an addict, right? I grew up in a very reasonable homesteader family. There were some other crazy problems, but over selection of seeds was not one of them. My grandfather grew a garden, and it was pretty much the same garden every year, and I had my own little row of all the crazy stuff that I could pick out and wanted to grow back then. There wasn't as much to select from back in the 80s. Every year we got two catalogs. They were pretty plain Jane and boring. They were only, little pamphlet-sized ones. One came from a company called Burpee, and the other one came from Parks. The old man, he wasn't tempted by them at all. They didn't have great photography or anything like that, and we grew food so that we could feed ourselves. I mean, that's what we did. That's what Grandpa did. Grandpa wasn't a seed addict. He had his own addictions, but seeds were not one of them. In fact, he probably kept getting those catalogs from Burpee and Parks. I was hoping he'd order some, and then every once in a while I'd order a few. So they thought maybe they'd get a big order out of him. They never really did because he saved all his seeds and he had selected for his climate type. And we grew the things that my grandmother preserved or that we ate right away because that made sense for us. But then I grew up and started growing my own gardens, and I still do that. I still grow the things that grow well, but I'm always experimenting. But every year I say to myself, this year will be different. This year I will get the seed addiction monkey off my back. This year I am only going to do 10 to 12 things that do well for us that we use just like Grandpa did. And quote a famous movie, just when I think I'm out, they pull me back in. And who does it? The catalogs. But there is none that is more of a crack dealer than Baker Creek, i.e. rareseeds.com. And I don't know what Jerry Gettle pays the dude that does the photography for these catalogs, but he needs to give him a bonus or a raise or something, because that catalog is like a book you put on a coffee table for people to look at. It is gorgeous, and it gets you every time. And I want to point out, I spread my seed orders around. I'm an open opportunity addict. We have some really great seed suppliers that do discounts for my members program. Unfortunately, Gettle's not one of them. So I need to tell that boy he needs to come out and give us a discount. I've asked a couple times, never got an answer. But it's an incredible book, and it got me this year again. I was going to do it. I was going to do it. This year was going to be my year to just take the stuff that I have, the seeds that I've saved, the few things I might have to pick up here and there, and just do that. But no. It was, I think, December 23rd, a couple days before Christmas. Dorothy said, some new stuff coming in the mail for you. Do you want these magazines? She calls catalogs magazines. And I picked that one up, and on the cover of that was those sunflowers. And all I could say was, damn it. I know I'm going to do it again. So today's show, we're going to go through 15 items that I already ordered. I've learned my lesson with this podcast. So I'll talk about this subject. You're going to hear at least one item this year that you've heard of before from me that I've never grown, because I talk about it, then I go to order it. It's always like perpetually sold out. In fact, that's going to be the first one. But for those watching the video, I always say that, there's links and resources and what have you. Well, I wanted to show you what that looks like if you've never been to the website before, if you're a perpetual YouTube watcher. And that's not a good one. Let's try this one. That's better. All right. So I have show notes all the time. And in this case, I have like a bazillion tabs open, and hopefully that won't be a technical problem for us. But this is a typical post on the website. That's why I always say go by and check it out. You can get the audio version of the podcast, so you can get all the resources. And so that we didn't have to sit here and wait for them to load, Let's start talking right now about the plants that I want to grow this year and why I've selected them. This one here is Chinese pink celery. And if you're thinking, I've heard Jack talk about it on the podcast before and say he's going to grow it before, you're right. The problem is that every time I've talked about it and I've waited more than a couple hours to go order it, this must be a really low seed quantity that they keep in reserve of this thing or something. I found this to be perpetually sold out. I've grown a lot of their white Chinese celery, and I really like it. But for those that can see the pictures, if you look at this, it is absolutely a gorgeous plant. And it looks to me like another one of these plants that we can grow in the HOAs, where the blue hares and the Karens complain about gardens, because it's very much an ornamental that's also an edible. And I've really never seen anything quite like it until this one's come around. And I'm going to grow this mainly because I love to grow celery. And for years and years, I've had an issue with growing celery in that I've been unable to grow it because I've been unable to germinate it. And I learned a couple years ago about a really simple technique to get your celery to germinate. And that's just to put a humidity dome over it. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. You can take a small flat, fill it with soil, put your celery seed on the top of it, and don't really bury it. Just kind of press it in. It's good that it has a little bit of light. And you can put that inside as a big Ziploc bag, and you'll get great germination. Or you can get a flat with a proper dome, or you can get like a Parks seed starting dome or anything like that. But as soon as I started putting a dome over my celery, I started getting almost 100% germination. And before I did that, I got almost none. So I like to grow celery, and this plant is beautiful. That's part of why I'm going to grow it. The other reason, though, is I do, as many of y'all know, I do a lot of aquaponics. And one of the plants that I have really just had amazing results with aquaponics and with wicking beds is celery. So I've got this beautiful pink celery, and I finally got some seed for it because I ordered it before I told you all about it again this year. And so that's why I'm going to be growing that one. And I'm really excited to finally get that one on the ground. The next one that I want to chat all about today is another celery. And they didn't get me with the catalog in this one. They got me when I went to put my flipping order in. And they use that, marketer trick that us marketers are fond of, which is, if you like this, you might like that. This is a giant red celery. I'd never seen this before. But like many of you, I get tempted by the catalog, but I never fill out a form and order it. And there's a couple reasons. One, it's just easier to order online. The other reason is sometimes stuff's sold out. So if you order from a form and a catalog, you just get, bad results. But this looks like a beautiful plant as well. It's a giant red celery, and I'm pretty much doing it for the same reasons that I'm growing the Chinese pink, other than it's just a different color and it's a larger plant. And I don't have a ton to say about this one, guys, other than I just they got me, right? They got me, and because they got me, I'm going to grow it. And I'm excited about what these colors, right, can bring to the table. In a lot of different ways. I occasionally have an adult beverage or two. I'm pretty big on Bloody Marys, and either one of those seems like they'd be awesome as a Bloody Mary garnish. I'm actually big on celery with more than just, celery is a stick that you're chewing and gnawing on. I'm big on cooking with celery. Definitely kind of, as an aromatic in like a mirepoix, but I'm also big on just cooking with celery. I think it's an overlooked vegetable. And so I'll a lot of times take celery, I'll slice it on the bias, and I'll make it part of a vegetable, kind of like a stir fry or something like that. And I encourage you to start experimenting more with it. And somebody's commenting in the comment section right now about the shirt I'm wearing. It says "Do the work." And I've had some people ask about shirts. 99% of the time, the shirts you see me wearing in these live streams are from John Willis at Original SOE Gear. You need to check him out. SEO Tactical Gear, great company, but he has a lot of like really cool t-shirts as well. And this one does say "Do the work," and I am fond of that philosophy. I think my favorite two from him are actually, one says "No one cares, work harder," and I really love that one. I think he might have lifted that saying from me. And then the other one is "I'm not participating in your new normal." And he's a really great guy, and I just wanted to throw that out there since somebody commented on it. All right, let's get back into the different stuff we'll be growing this year. And this is one Well, they got me, guys. They got me with the freaking catalog on this one. When I turned the page and saw this, I was like, I have to grow it. It's called Blue Balloon Flower, and I've never heard of this before. And I'm not a huge guy on flowers and ornamentals. I try to make sure that I grow enough flowering herbs and some quality flowers and stuff like that, just to bring in pollinators and things like that. But I don't generally sit around getting excited about growing flowers in particular. I don't know why, I just don't. When I saw this one, I thought this is beautiful, and it produces an edible root. And for those that can see in the video, they basically either saute or pickle the roots. And I'm not huge on tubers, and I'm kind of flying through these right now so you can get a look at them. I'm not big on tubers. I'm not big on carbohydrate. But when I look at this, I see a lot of potential here. And when I read something like this can be pickled, this is more how I've been using a lot of tubers lately, is either doing a natural fermentation pickle or a vinegar-based pickle, and infusing different flavors into them and using them more as garnishes. And this just seems like a really awesome freaking plant to be able to experiment with that and maybe infuse some flavors into it. Like, first thing I would have to do is try this. It doesn't really explain much about what it tastes like, so I really don't know. Based on the fact that this is a flower and the shape of the root, I would expect this to have a flavor somewhat similar to like Jerusalem artichoke. Whether it go more to the sweet side of that or the savory side, I wouldn't know. But they are appreciated for having antimicrobial, antibacterial, and other medicinal qualities, and yet they're used culinarily. So I always like when I see something that has kind of a tonifying effect or any sort of medicinal effect that can be used just as a culinary product as well. It always excites me. And I've got some other stuff I want to talk to you about growing today that I think you'll start to see when I start talking about using flavors, where we can go. Before we do that, though, this is one I've really thought about growing a lot in the past, and I just have never done it. It's called lettuce leaf basil. And it's just a huge leaf variety of basil. I mean, the leaves are big enough to use as like lettuce wraps. And I've always been a huge fan of basil. And one of the things that I think you can do when it comes to selecting new things to grow, it's always a gamble, right? You figure out what does well for you. There's certain things like I can grow peppers. I don't even have to try. I bet you if I planted nothing this year, some of the peppers that fell on the ground will grow for me, right? And that's true with basil even more so. So one of your little hacks is when you try something new, maybe if basil does well, try a different variety of basil. If radishes do well, try a different variety of radish. If peppers, try a different variety of peppers. So you're still kind of in that same wheelhouse. And I just think this is going to be a fantastic crop. And there's something else going on here too. I don't just grow all this stuff for myself. I grow it to discover it, to be able to talk about it, because, I love getting this catalog every year. I love looking at these pictures. It gives you all this good feeling. It's going to be great. But I accept that any seed company is going to sell, kind of the attributes of the product that they're selling, and they're going to make it look as good as they can. And I also kind of accept that not everything is going to do well for everybody. So I know some of the stuff I select every year. If I get 25 to 50% of new items to produce well for me and enjoy them and want to grow them again sometime, I feel that like a home run. But I also try to always look at things, because I know a lot of you guys grow for market. You actually make a profit on what you're growing. Or some of you start plants and you sell them at farmers market, things like that. Or you're selling to restaurants or what have you. And I try to explore some of these options so that I can give you an honest critique. Is this thing as good as it looks on paper or not? And, if even if it is, okay, is it going to survive being harvested Thursday and sold on Saturday at the farmer's market? Because some stuff won't. Some stuff's great, but you cut it, man, and you start that countdown, and some stuff can last a week beautifully if properly taken care of, and some of it can't. I personally think that lettuce leaf basil, though, if if that does well at all, that seems like a huge product to market to any kind of farm to fork restaurant. Again, like that used as a lettuce wrap just seems like an explosion of flavor. Even if it was paired with like, you take a romaine cup and then one of those as well, or on a salad, you know, just as kind of like a final big leaf. Or I did one year, and this was like eating crack. I grew some nasturtiums, and the nasturtiums were massive. I mean, they were bigger than a cat head biscuit in diameter, the leaves of the nasturtiums. And we took those nasturtium leaves and we would make like a little spring roll with two of them, because they do get kind of tender when they get something hot on them. And so we would take two of them, bundle them together. And I got some snails, just canned escargot snails, and I did them out on the grill with butter and garlic. And then we took the snails, about 2 to a roll, and cut them in half because they're kind of big, so you're not kind of pulling them out when you're eating them. And then we took some garlic chives and some onion chives, and we kind of nestled them in and made like a spring roll out of those. And that was freaking amazing. That was something like you ate that and you go, why isn't this in a restaurant? And part of it is that nasturtium greens don't keep that well. I think a restaurant doing that would either have to have daily deliveries, maybe do it one day a week, or they need to be growing nasturtiums on the back wall of the restaurant, like to be able to do that. And then you only have a limited season in the South where you can do it, because once it gets hot enough, the nasturtiums are like, I quit, and they go away. Well, basil gets heat. It just goes, more please, I'll take some more of that. So that would be like one idea of how something like that could be used. And one of the things I want to talk to you guys about, those of you that want to grow for profit or are growing for profit, as you start to expand into marketing into the culinary world and trying to sell to restaurants, which is a great business model unless you're like New York where they keep closing them down, because they order in volume and they order consistently. There's a fine line with chefs. Chefs can be a little bit arrogant. I mean, even in small little, niche restaurants, you never heard the guy's name. I'm not talking about just TV chefs. I'm not talking just about Guy Fieri or Bobby Flay. They can be a little bit arrogant with not really wanting to take suggestions, but on the other hand, sometimes they need a suggestion so that they can take that item and do something with it. And what we found when we were marketing duck eggs is, if you said something like, what we do is we do blah, 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 you kind of got like the whole chef block, right? Like I don't need you. You're some plebe telling me what to do with food. But if you say, like, I was at a restaurant one time and they did this with it, I wonder if there's anything like that you might think is cool or something. Like, they tend to open up a little bit more with what can be done with them. And I think that basil leaf is going to be easy to grow, fast to grow, tolerate heat. Basil generally, when you cut it, you put some some sort of like a moisture, just like paper toweling or something around the stalks and package it right. It keeps good for about a week. I think that would be really, really a great idea. K-Bonk is asking me if I've ever tried growing snails. I did try to grow, I can't remember what they're, apple snails, I guess they're called. Not apple snails, mystery snails, which you can buy in the pet trade. And they're supposed to just overpopulate everything, and supposedly they're edible. And once they get to a certain size, you can eat them. And I put like 20 of them into my system, and then I never saw one ever again. I have a ton of ram's horns, but I don't think they make a good eating snail. And I have a ton of little pond snails, and they don't work. If I could find a snail that would do well in my systems, I would definitely grow snails. I think any kind of shellfish. I mean, some people are like, ew, snails, man. Mollusks and me, we get along. But I just don't know that it's the right climate or I have the right systems for it. Let's go back to some other stuff I want to grow. This is another one of these really unique plants that I talked about these last year. This was another thing that when I talked about them, I talked too long and ordered too late, and I didn't get to buy any last year. And it's called a Chinese python snake bean. And it's not actually a bean. It's actually like a gourd or a squash. And they grow, over 3 foot long and up to a couple inches in diameter, but they taste a lot like green beans. And those of you on the video can see the old man. I don't know where that old codger's from, but Baker Creek has got a good character trait there. But there's the flower on that. It's an interesting looking little flower. Kind of reminds me of like loofah gourd flower. And I'm excited about growing these because just I've never done it before. I'm a big fan of green beans in general, any kind of pot. And we tend to have a couple seasons here. We have everything freezes and dies season. We have everything explodes in growth season. We call that early spring. We have heat comes and kills half of everything season. And then we have everything blows up again that didn't die during the summer season. We call that fall. And what happens is when we plant green beans, we have to wait till it's warm enough to plant them. And they start growing, and they take a certain amount of time to start produce. They're quick, but they're not that quick. And then heat death season comes, and we end up with a lot of different issues with diseases like rust on our green beans. So we have a pretty limited window of good production from green beans. And that's why I've gone to growing a lot of the Chinese noodle beans, because they don't care. I can seed and reseed all through the season and keep propagating it over and over again, and those work well for that. But anything kind of in that niche that would help others, especially, I'd want to do. And this one looks real interesting. Again, it's this one is called Chinese green python snake bean. It's the largest snake bean variety, growing up to 60 inches long and 1.5 inches thick. That's 5 foot. It develops a bright green color. When you harvest them at 12 to 30 inches, you use them like green beans or like summer squash. So I don't know it doesn't really say what happens when they get much bigger, like if they become maybe too tough to use well. Traditionally stir-fried with peppers and onions. Yeah, I'm going to try that. In Africa, the inside of fully mature fruit can be scraped out and used like tomato paste. Now, there's no photography on that with the book. So I don't know if that means it's red or it's just it has a similar characteristic or flavor. But it's something I really want to check out. And if it has enough crunch to stand up, it seems like one of those things that might be really optimized for pickling, either fermented or vinegar based. My gut with that plant, just on what I know, and like I've played around with like doing fermentations of squashes and stuff like that, they generally don't handle lacto fermentation well. They really kind of limp and not so good eats, as Alton Brown would say. But vinegar, they tend to do well. So a vinegar-based pickle with that. And that seems like one that would be really cool for a market gardener, maybe. It says it's hard to find them, and they don't travel well. But a lot of times, what does travel well mean? Well, when you're, local food, travel well means I can harvest it today, sell it to you tonight, and you can eat it tomorrow, and it's still good. If you're growing true commercial, like warehouse shipping, it has to leave California 2 weeks ago, and you have to cook it a week from now, and it still has to be edible. So I think there's a big difference there. Toger says he doesn't think he'd eat any freshwater snails or shellfish. Well, I would if I knew what water they came from. Just saying on that. I mean, if you couldn't eat freshwater snails, everybody in France would be dead by now. but I understand when people don't want to eat a certain thing. Moving back on to chatting about different crops this year. This was one that I got pretty excited when I saw. I have always been a fan of kind of the Asian style of cucumber. This one's called China Jade cucumber. It's your typical Asian variety cucumber in that they grow long and slender. And my experience with these has always been I get my best results by trellising them so that they can grow and hang and let gravity be your friend. If they touch the ground, they tend to get all curled and twisted and knotted, and they just aren't as great as far as using them, because when they're long and straight, like you see them pictured there, they're just easy to slice. They're easy to do whatever you want to do with them. And this was an easy sell for me because I really like Asian cucumbers. I actually prefer them to like an English slicing cucumber or our typical pickling cucumbers and things like that. They just have a milder taste. They generally taste better when used with peelings on, so you don't have to peel them. They don't have a bitterness in the peel. As long as they're not stressed during the grow, they work out really well. They're great for pickling. But what made me decide, I'll try these out is if you grow them They're a hybrid in that they do not need to be pollinated to produce. And you might wonder, well, why would someone so big on open pollination like Jack want that? Well, we're back to there's the perfect world, and then there's a world that is practical. So again, we have this kind of crazy seasonality here in Texas where most people have they have a dearth in winter where it's hard to grow. And then everything in between is great. Texas, we have a dearth in winter and a dearth in summer, and it's made up of different things that cause it. Cucumbers and too much heat. I know people think cucumbers love heat, and they do, right up till about 99 degrees. Well, the other thing that happens here with it as we go into that summer is we have just explosive populations of cucumber beetle. And cucumber beetle, they don't really hurt the plant directly. They transmit a disease called cucumber mosaic virus. And if you've ever been growing cucumbers and they just look great, and then all of a sudden the leaves start to yellow and they just kind of freaking crumble, and it just kind of chases up the plant. It starts out closer to the ground and it just slowly, eviscerates the vine. Most of the time that is cucumber mosaic virus. And what happens is those little yellow and black cucumber beetles, they end up, basically feeding on a plant. They feed by sucking on the juice of the leaves. So they don't do a lot of damage, but if that plant is infected, when they go to the next plant and they feed on that plant, they then transmit that virus. And you have a couple different ways you can combat that. One is that you can grow under mesh and keep the insects out. Of course, the problem with that is you don't have enough pollination. So I'm going to be putting a pretty good mesh system on my greenhouse this spring. And I have a system in there, a hydroponic bucket-based system that is ideal for growing cucumbers. It's what I put it in. It's what I built it mainly to do. And with a screen, when I say screen, I'm talking about a shade cloth screen, so that we knock the intensity of the sun down a little bit. And we also are able to keep not every insect out. I'm sure we'll have some issues with it, but we'll be able to mitigate that. Being able to grow something this awesome that doesn't need to be pollinated, I find that to be intriguing, and we'll see how it works out. And as we're going through this today, Joe asked me, are we just talking annuals today? Yes, we are. We are only talking annuals today because we're talking about seed catalogs and the crack dealing mentality that comes with them. That's what we're digging in today is seed catalogs. This is a plant next up, Rosa di Rotunda eggplant. And this is one I've thought about growing for a long time, and I just have never done it. A couple of years ago, I started playing around with different Asian variety eggplants. And one I found was called Ping Tong, and it ended up being like one of the biggest windfall. This is like when I found that plant, I was like, this is why we grow new stuff every year. Because I've never been a fan of the big old Italian eggplants, the big giant ones like you always see in the store. And I think most people that don't like eggplant, probably that's your entire experience with eggplant. And if you don't know what you're doing as far as food prep wise, and you buy one of those and you just cut it up and cook it some random way, it's probably the case you're not going to like it. A lot of those larger eggplants, they have a certain amount of alkalinity in them. And if you don't cut them first and salt them and sweat them, they kind of remind you of like licking an ashtray when you eat one. And that's not what I think anybody's looking for, even a smoker's looking for when it comes to culinary experiences, licking an ashtray. You salt them, and then they basically go very neutral in flavor profile. And that's why you see things like eggplant parmesan or something like that, where we bread it, and basically they'll take up, they're like a sponge, they'll take up any flavors that you provide to them. Or you can make things like baba ganoush or whatever. And that's freaking awesome. But I'm kind of the guy, I want to go out to the garden. I want to pick a plant. I want to bring it inside, chop it up, throw it in a saute pan or something like that, throw it in a bowl raw, whatever, and I want to be able to just eat it. I don't want to take these extra steps. So when I found Ping Tong, it's Asian sweet variety eggplant. It had a sweetness to it. It still had that sponge-like characteristics. You throw a little soy sauce or some hoisin or something like that. It really would pull that flavor. And done as a stir fry with shrimp and a little bit of like a shrimp stock. That was just, and then something to accent it, maybe radish pods or something, and a little bit of green bean. It was a great plant. And when I found that, I started thinking about growing this. This one is said to have flavors that are kind of like a combination of eggplant, pepper, and tomato, which I find interesting because all of those are nightshades. They're all related species. It's a cool looking little plant. And you can see that like a classic use of it in the photograph, if you're able to see the photograph, is almost like a bruschetta or bruschetta or however you want to pronounce it, where you make a little toasted bit of bread and then it's served on top of that with like some olive oil and herbs. I'm not big on the bread anymore, but I am big on doing things like that. So I'm kind of interested in that. Like, what would that be like as a burger topper if we added a little bit of chili pepper to it? With a little kick of heat on top of it. Plus, again, guys, I do try to find some stuff and say, hey, what about my people that are growing for profit? My experience with these smaller eggplant varieties is they do store fairly well. Now, I'm not talking about, like a winter squash, but if you harvest them, midweek and you sell them to a chef on the weekend and he wants to, use them in preparation through the week, that usually works out okay. This seems to me like something that you would not have a lot of competition with in many local areas. It would definitely be a seasonal variety, but a lot of the, farm to fork guys, they really kind of dig that whole seasonality of things. So, little error there. So I wanted to try it for that alone, plus for my own use. And then my other thing about eggplant is I have never grown anything. I'm not going to say it's pest-free. There are some sort of little leaf miner or something that gets on my eggplant, and it ends up looks like somebody went and poked little holes in it with a pin. It doesn't care. It doesn't care at all. It's like, whatever, I'll grow more leaves with the productivity. I mean, I don't really need to grow any more of the pink tongue for another season because I grew so much of it. I ended up like, what are we going to do with it? It turns out it dehydrates really well. As long as you want to use it like casseroles or soups or stir fries or whatever. Eggplant, just very easy. Just chop it, about a little less than a ½ inch thick as far as those long ones. Throw them in the Excalibur and they dehydrate perfectly. So I ended up with just tons and tons of this stuff. Really enjoyed using it. So I'm figuring here. Now, again, when you try something new, you never really know. But I've done a couple different varieties of eggplants. It just pink tongue was kind of the one that was like the best tasting, looked the best, and did the best. But all of them were explosively productive. In fact, to the point where you start trying to give them away and people are like, oh, thank you. And then you give them, they're like, no, I still got some. So I'm thinking this plant, based on prior performance, might be really, really good for that. Now, the next one I got for you, again, I'm thinking about myself, but I'm also thinking about you guys that grow for farmers markets and stuff like that. This is a variety of okra called Okinawan pink okra. Now, there was one that was on the cover of Baker Creek last year. I can't remember what it was called. It was orange something, and it looked really cool, and it didn't do well for me. Good old-fashioned, regular, everyday, crimson spineless okra's done really well for me. Burgundy okra's done really well for me. This one looks gorgeous. It looks like pink icicles. And it is an Asian variety of okra. My understanding is okra all originated in Africa. But I imagine as, things expanded and got traded, then things got bred and selected locally. So did this actually come from Africa and just get really adopted in Asia, or was it bred in Asia? I don't know. It doesn't provide us with that information, but it was sourced out of Asia, specifically China. And it is a incredibly beautiful looking plant. And I think okra is one of the best edible ornamentals that there is. And the reason that I say that is I think okra from, certain groups of people probably gets looked down on a little bit as, something poor Southerners eat or something like that. And, when it first came to North America, it was really slave food. It was African slaves that brought seeds along with them and made it part of their diet. Of course, it's very famous in Louisiana for use in okra and for other things. And I don't think you can, not okra, I'm sorry, gumbo. And I personally don't think you can make okra be okra. I'm sorry, I keep saying okra. You can make gumbo be gumbo without okra. There's just, you can't really get that consistency of the broth. I don't care how good your roux is without okra in it. But and if you cook it, any time I've grown these okras that are different colors, you cook them, they turn green, right? So like they don't hold the color in the cook. But boy, color sells, and to me they're a beautiful plant. And I think okra is beautiful when it's producing its pods, but I also think it's beautiful when you go ahead and let some of those pods completely flower out. So I'm thinking this one would be really, really cool. And then I don't know about y'all. I like pickled okra. I know some people don't, but I do. And I think you'd be able to, with a vinegar-based pickle, get it to hold that pink color. And I would do that as a baby pickled okra. So, you're talking about like 2-inch pods. And I think that could be, for some of y'all that are doing like a value-added product, could be really amazing. Because I've never seen anything like that. Pink pickled okra, pink pickled baby okra in jars. I'd buy it. I mean, I would buy it at least to try it. Trey says he's not a fan of okra in his gumbo. You're kind of like people that think you can put beans in chili and still call it chili then. I'm sorry. No, it's fine. Everybody has personal preferences. But I'm really kind of excited about growing that this year, because it's been something, except for that one, it was like Ting something orange. That one didn't do well for me. Every okra I ever grew exploded for me. And Steve's saying okra is great. I wish I could figure out how to grow it in zone 5. I love pickled okra, fried okra, all okra. It loves heat, man. It is definitely, like I said, it's from the African continent. It's from the hot part of Africa too. One of the things that you could try if you're in a lower zone, it does pretty well started, early and then put out like we do with tomatoes and peppers, but started a little later than you do those things, so that by the time you're putting it out, it is significantly hot, but it has a huge root structure. It's a deep, it almost, if you ever pull one out at the end of a season, it almost looks like a tree root, like a tree taproot. So what I've found is if you want to be able to transplant okra and have it do well for you, plant it, when you start it in something that's long, that gives a lot of room for that root to kind of come out in a carrot-like shape. So, one of the cheapest things you can start plants in are like the 16-ounce red Solo cups we all used to get at booze parties and drink from when we were kids, those cups, right? And just drill some holes in the bottom of them for drainage. And that way you can let that plant size out and understand most plants, when you look at them, if they're 6 inches tall, they have 6 inches of root structure. So then you got to kind of time when that plant moves out before you start to do damage to the roots. And the other thing I would do with a plant like okra in a more northern climate, see if you can find a place like a south-facing brick wall, right? Where I just wouldn't want to plant anything against the south-facing brick wall in Texas. That's like asking for it to be fried. But where you're at, that heat, especially as you're coming into your early summer, and carryover may be helpful. And the other thing is, if you have a greenhouse, it might be too hot in there. But if you did a greenhouse with like a 30% shade cloth, you might be able to grow some of these plants that are more of southern varieties. But also remember, part of this is you find out what works well for you and then grow that. So there's a lot of things that grow really well in zone 6 and zone 5. I grew up in zone 6 that don't do so well for us down here in Texas that I would love to grow. And then there's things that I can grow here that we always struggled with. We grew a lot of peppers when I was a kid, and they did okay. But I never knew, that pepper plants could be 5 foot tall in a single season or taller until I moved into the South. Like, I think if you can't grow okra and peppers in the South, you need to work on your base skill level a lot, because it's really some of the easiest stuff to grow down here, and it's not easy to grow in other places. Next up, this is wild Zatar oregano, and whenever I find an herb that at least is claimed that it is basically still in its wild form, It hasn't really been cultivated, or like I said, selectively bred. It's been cultivated, but not selectively bred. I'm always interested in it. And this is going back to my philosophy again with do what has already shown to do well for you. So just growing plain old everyday oregano, which is a perennial, but generally in my zone is considered an annual. I don't know who considers it an annual because it survives every year. Last year, I have about 4 just plain old, and I mean, they're like, when I say plain old oregano, I mean Home Depot Lowe's Bonnie oregano in a cup, and you throw it in the garden. I have like 4 or 5 of those out last year. And even with those, now they were a couple seasons old. 2 of them made it last year. And for those that don't know what happened to us last year in Texas, we got about 10 days where it did not go above freezing for the high. And of those 10 days, about 5 days, it didn't get out of the single digits. And we had multiple days with lows in the negatives. And I know if you're from like where I grew up in Pennsylvania or something like that, whatever, that's Tuesday in the winter. I understand that. That's not how Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas area is. We had a 60,000 acre lake freeze completely over. That does not happen here. There were dummies walking on it. Fortunately, none of them fell through, or unfortunately, depending on how you feel about humans and Darwinism. You know, a Darwin Award there could have been awarded, but it wasn't. But that doesn't happen. And even in that case, like half of my oregano still came back once it was firmly established. So I'm wondering, now this is a very Mediterranean, oregano, but I'm wondering if it might be able to make it through our winters, and that would add a different variety of oregano. And the flavor is a blend of oregano, thyme, and marjoram. Now, I find that to be really interesting. I also find that to be another one of those things, you guys that grow for profit, that sell to restaurants, it would be a really interesting plant to be able to market. And it's an herb. And you know what you call an herb? You don't know what it's for? You call it a weed, because that's how it grows. They're like honey badgers. They're indestructible. You can grow large amounts of them. So I think that would be another one that some of you guys might want to check out. Now, the next one, I'm freaking stoked about this. And I just hope the sizzle matches the steak on this one. I really do. I have always wanted to grow wasabi, and I have found some stuff that gets you close. I brought to you guys like 2 years ago when I started doing hydro a wasabi arugula, and it is all there. When you let somebody taste it and they know what wasabi is supposed to taste like, that they're like, they get hit in the nose with it, but it's arugula. It's a leaf. And what we've taken to doing with it, if I do my own sashimi, I'll slice like tuna and I'll put like 1 leaf of that oregano around the tuna. And you get that, and a little tiny bit of soy, man, you get that experience, but it's the flavor, but there's zero in the texture. This is a radish that's a bulb radish that's supposed to taste exactly like wasabi. And if it is, I'm going to grow the hell out of this. I mean, I'm going to grow, because I'll tell you what I can grow is radishes. I can grow radishes all the damn time. I don't even have to try. And again, so we're back to trying to make something that we know works and get something different out of it. And I am pretty excited about this one. When it's grated up, it even kind of looks like wasabi. And I've had a lot of people tell me wasabi is nowhere near as hard to grow as people think. Okay, then grow it. Because it seems like the people that tell me that are never growing it, right? Like, well, where's yours? Well, I don't have any. So you don't know. This seems like a really great idea. And I have another plant coming later that'll kind of come back on this. But my other thought with this is I grow a lot of daikon. And mostly what I do with daikon is I let it go to seed and flower, because it's a great pollinator crop, and it's a great crop for improving soil. And I do use some every year in pickles and slaws and stuff like that. But mostly what I do is when the pods come on it, I pick the seed pods, and I'll do like them in salads or stir fries. And I'm wondering what the seed pods of this radish is going to be like. Because if you it looks like a green bean, tastes like wasabi, you can play with that culinarily really, really well. And I don't know how well they are, as far as how long do they take to produce seed pods, how much does a plant produce? But this one's worth experiment with. And this is another thing. If you're selling to restaurants, you're selling to chefs, if you can walk in and hand them a radish, especially if they're kind of an Asian theme that tastes like wasabi, I think you'll get their attention. And if you can do a seed pod that tastes like that, or what about the seed pods of this in a pickle, or the seed pods and the radish itself in a pickle? There just seems like there's got to be something to this one that if it lives up to what it's being sold as, if it really does taste like wasabi, and you're a wasabi person, it's kind of like a perfect world all come together. And that's kind of where we're moving with this right now, moving more toward substitutions. I'll talk about some things that we can grow that maybe we wish we could grow the other thing. It's either too hard, it's not climate right, the climate's not right, it's not worth it. Like, you need so much space, it's not worth it. And one of the most expensive things in the world that you can buy is called saffron. I believe it is, in my estimation, or my knowledge anyway, the single most expensive herb by weight in the world. I think it actually sells for more than gold does when you measure it out by weight. And it comes from a plant called a crocus. And you get this plant that it's not in the tulip family. It doesn't grow where tulips grow, but it kind of sort of in a way looks like a tulip. And there's a couple little stamens inside it, and there's that's your saffron. That's it. That's all you get. So you get big flower, like 3 or 4 little stems. That's why it's so expensive. I didn't know until I got this year's crack catalog that safflower is actually called safflower because it can be used as a substitute for saffron. And that's what the safflower is right here. It's called Corallus azafrun safflower. And it lets me, again, not being the guy that's big on just growing flowers for the sake of growing flowers. If I can grow flowers, if I can get the beauty of a flower, if I can attract pollinators, if I can provide beneficial habitat, but the yield from the flower is something beneficial. That's why I always grow early in the year. I grow nasturtiums, which I mentioned earlier, and I grow calendula, because calendula is a decent pot herb, but it's also a decent medicinal herb. Nasturtium is just a delicious plant. I love the flowers and I love the leaves both. So if I can actually grow something akin to my own saffron here, I think that would be cool. So I'm pretty excited about giving this a chance. I've never grown it before. It says the original seed was originally brought to New Mexico. It's widely adapted. Flowers can be used for coloring, spice, dried to brew tea, and also dye with deep orange, almost red pigment. The young plants make a delicious leafy green. The seeds can be pressed into oil. I don't think anybody on a home growing scale is going to be doing that. And the deep tap roots are a very efficient soil breaker. So that's what I want to do. If I want to like kind of branch out and try something different, if I can find something that's not a unitasker, to me that's really exciting. K-Monk says, Jack, all this will be hydroponic? No, absolutely not. Most of it won't be, honestly. Some of it will. I'm definitely going to grow. I'm going to grow some of that lettuce. As soon as my seeds get here, some of that lettuce leaf basil is going in one of my hydro indoor systems. Absolutely, because I love basil this time of year when no one else has it. But a lot of it's going to go in my gardens. And that's kind of like one of the reasons I'm doing this is I have so much bed space. Some of this will be aquaponic. Some of it will be hydroponic. Most of this will be grown, and I have a tremendous amount of wicking beds and regular based garden beds. So that's how I'm going to be growing most of this. And then, but what I was saying on the safflower, if you have something that improves soil, attracts beneficials, provides a kind of a medicinal and a culinary herb, provides as a young plant provides an additional green, and improves soil at the same time, you got a big win there. And I've thought about trying to grow crocuses and produce saffron just so I could say I did it. And I really don't think it's worth it. That's why nobody does it in the United States. It's just we're not meant to do it. But when I looked at this, it gave me an idea. How many of y'all that are in the live stream have heard of a Doghead Brewing? I think it's called Doghead Brewing. They do some really cool beers and ales. And one that they do is really more of a mead than a beer. And I can't remember what it's called now. Somebody will probably know it and tell me, but it's made with, I think, muscadine grape, white muscadine, and it's in honey. And Midas Touch, that's what it's called, Midas Touch, because it's beautiful golden orange color. And they get that color using saffron. So I'm thinking that some of my mead stuff might be livened up with this safflower. Yep, Midas Touch, Troy's got it. Yep, that's what it is. And that's one of those, I don't drink a lot of beers anymore because, one, I've cut my drinking way back, but I've also cut carbohydrates way back. But if I'm going to make something, I can make plain old garden variety mead any day. But I like to be able to make meads that are unique and have stories behind them and things like that. So that's kind of a big part of what I want to accomplish with growing this, if it works. And it's one of those ones that if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. This one I know will work, and it's not new. I've talked about it a long time. This is, they call it something different than I do. They call it zucchini Zucchino Rampaneschi squash. This is why I call it Trumbuschino, because it's easier to say Trumbuschino than it is that thing. But this is a squash that can be used as both a winter and a summer squash. I've grown this forever now. It is the only squash that I've been able to consistently grow that defeats squash vine borers when they come in our summer period. The squash vine borers do after it. They attack it, but if the plant's well established, it just keeps growing. It don't care. So why did I bring it around this year? Well, because when I was going through the catalog, buying my crack for the year, I saw this and said, you know what? It's probably a good time to bring some new genetics in. So I wanted to talk to you about that a bit as well. I've been growing this for 4 seasons now, and I've saved the seed here locally, so it's well adapted. But the first year I grew it, it did well. And I think it's good for those of us who are developing seed strains and all to every once in a while bring in some new genetics of the same plant. I'm not talking about hybridization here. I'm talking about the exact same species and variety. And to continue to evolve those genetics, because as you select from that next generation, you're going to select the best of the best to save seed from, and you're going to keep strengthening those genetics. But this plant and is one that I recommend everybody try. And I don't know how far north you can go, but I've had people grow this as far north as Zone 6, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, etc., and they told me it did great. It does great here. When you let it get really big and you let it stay on the vine, it turns an orange color, kind of a light orange, pinkish color like a pumpkin. It gets a very thick skin. It will store for months. You don't have to do anything as long as you don't break it, because when they get big, they're easy to break if you're not careful. Once it kind of firms up, you can set it on a shelf in your pantry. And 4 months later, you can cut it open and eat it. And it tastes a lot like butternut squash. When they're young, they taste like zucchini, but that long neck has no seeds. So you take that long neck and you do something like put it through a freaking food processor and you get perfectly sliced zucchini slices. Really, really, really easy to do. And I've played around, like I said, with pickling squash. And as long as you're talking about a vinegar pickle, it actually comes out really well. They also produce a lot of blossoms. I like to eat squash blossoms as well. And they're just an impressive plant. And you can see most of the pictures that they have on the site for Baker Creek. Well, they are kind of like wound up, right? They're kind of twisty. And that's because those, I can tell you right now, those were grown on the ground. If you trellis Trumbuschino, it grows super straight. I've got pictures, of me holding some that are 4.5 foot long and weigh over 25 pounds. And they grow perfectly straight. And the vines have the ability to support them. They're not going to fall off. You don't need to tie them up or anything like that. If one gets wounded or something, maybe. Ephraim says, how many is the bare minimum of seed catalogs you look at through each year? Dozens. I don't know. I pretty much look at them all when they come in. I will say there is something to marketing with photography, and several people have commented on Baker Creek's photography, including me on this episode so far. They're kind of easier to look through when they have good photography. So if you're a seed catalog company, you don't do as good a business and you're actually sending out physical catalogs, you might want to up your photography game. And I would go with a smaller catalog, pushing people to the website, with great pictures over a great big catalog that has everything with little bitty, kind of non-glossies. And I bet you most people in the stream here would agree with that. But I'm glad you asked that, because I do want to point something out. One of the reasons I have so much knowledge about plants and plant types and varieties is that I literally sit down and read seed catalogs. Now, I'm not saying that I read every variety in every catalog that comes in. And at this point, I've read a lot of them, so I know this variety, I know that variety. But I do read, and even if it's something I'm not going to grow, I read it, and I start to form in my mind relationships of, okay, this is in the aster family, right? So it's probably going to do this, or this is a squash, but is it a mixta or a maxima or or a mosquito? Like what species within the family of squash is this thing? So what does that mean about where it's going to do it? Who grew it? Where did it come from? Where is it grown commercially? Right. And I learn a ton through catalogs. So even if you're not going to, go out and buy 15 varieties every year, you're going to pick one or two. If somebody will send you a catalog for free with information in it for free to learn about plants for free, I would do it. And it's one of my favorite things in the wintertime is to kick back and relax with a seed catalog, especially like a really cold day. Maybe you have a little blackberry liqueur or something that you made up for yourself, or a really good winter mead, and you sit and look out the window and it's cold and icy and nasty out there, but you're all inside all warm and you're thinking of spring and reading through them. Man, I love that. So thanks for asking that question. Next one that we got, this was one that my wife fell in love with, and she fell in love with another sunflower variety too. We got that one going as well. This is the one on the cover of the Dadgone catalog. It is called Chocolate Cherry Sunflower. And I don't know that it's going to produce sunflower seeds that are much in the way of any culinary value, but it is just a gorgeous plant. And this is another thing. Like, I think, when you bring something new in you've never grown before, you take a bit of a risk. But we grow sunflower accidentally all over the place because we feed the birds black oil sunflower, just the cheap stuff that comes from like Tractor Supply or Atwoods or whatever. And as long as the plant gets past the sprout stage before the ducks find it, we grow sunflower like crazy. Really beautiful plant. I see a lot of bee activity, specifically more bumblebees than honeybees on sunflower. So we're going to grow this one just because Dorothy wants to. And, when someone deals with all the crap you deal with a podcaster for a husband and their wife wants something, if you're smart, you do it. And then we also have, I missed one. Hold on a second. Another sunflower. Hopefully I didn't mess up the link. I did. All right. We're going to be growing. It's red Mexican. Doesn't want to find it. And we're going to skip ahead here for a second, and we're going to talk about the last one. So there's the Mexican red sunflower. I don't know if I'll find that one for the live stream or not, but it's just a beautiful plant as well. And this is the other one that I found, and this one I did not see in the catalog, and in my opinion, it probably should be in there. I saw this, and I'm like, I got to try this. And I talked earlier about the Wasabi Radish and the seed pods. This one is grown specifically for the seed pods, and it produces them in abundance. And they are really pretty, red streaked with red and green, like purple, red, and green streaked. And a really cool looking little flower that I bet tastes delicious as well. I am not a big guy on radish. Okay. I'm not huge on growing like cherry bell radishes and things like that for the purpose of just eating straight up radishes. I've never been a fan of the typical breakfast radish or anything like that. Sliced up is like a what am I trying to say? Like a garnish or something like that. Like I'm always the guy that leaves that thing to be taken away by the busboy or whatever, right? I've never been big, but daikons, especially when they're pickled or fermented or made into like a slaw, the pods, etc. That I really, really enjoy. And I think that this red rat tail could be a really amazing thing. And what I'm thinking is, if those wasabi radishes produce a good seed pod, and you do a mix of the wasabi and the red rat's tail radish in a pickle, that could be pretty cool. And then the last one, I did find it, is the Mexican red sunflower. And this was another one that my wife just went, I want that. So I'm like, okay, we're getting it. Now, one of the things about this that I'm going to be interested in figuring out here is, this is very much an ornamental if you look at it. It's bright red, bumblebee friendly. They're not a huge plant. They grow fairly small, lots of flowers per plant, produce all season long. They grow about 5 foot tall, but they're really mostly an ornamental. However, it's been my experience that Mexican sunflower in general is a really great fodder plant. And that could be a problem. That could be a problem because, like, any kind of rodent species or whatever would tend to eat it. My friend Nick Ferguson brought me a Mexican sunflower one time, little start, and he's like, you can just cut a stick off, put it in the ground, and it'll start growing. I was, well, that's great. I put it out in my little nursery area, and I went out there 2 days later, and it was gone. Something ate it like below the soil level and destroyed it. So I'm not sure if that's going to be the case. Now, if that's going to be the case, but it doesn't get eaten until it's like fed, it might be a good duck fodder plant in addition to an ornamental. But that's going to be the last one that I'm going to talk about today. And again, I'm hoping that this wasn't just a list of plants. That, like, as we went through this, we kind of covered some things about how to think about this a little bit differently, and how to make selections like this on your own, because there's no doubt that I might want to grow some things that you don't want to grow, or you want to grow some things I don't want to grow, or that living in different climate types, some of the things that are super easy for me to grow will be difficult for you to grow, or vice versa. And being able to, like we did with the safflower versus saffron, and finding that substitution, or a wasabi radish versus true wasabi, right? Things like that allow us to adjust things to where we are. And I want to kind of talk from the permaculture perspective a little bit here. One of the things that hooked me on permaculture very early on was seeing things like Sepp Holzer grow a freaking lemon tree in the middle of the Austrian Alps. And when I saw that, I'm like, I want to grow a lemon tree in Texas. If Sepp Holzer can grow a lemon tree in the Austrian Alps, I grow one here in North Texas. Turns out it's actually easier for Sepp to do in the Alps than it is for me to do here. Because when I get a 9 degree below zero day, there's no snow blanket. There's no snow cover that I can basically utilize as an insulation blanket over top of that tree and let it sleep through the winter, which is what he's doing. And so that's kind of like a magic trick. And there's a lot of people that have done a lot of really cool magic tricks, and I'm not putting them down. But what you're not going to see is even a Sepp Holzer with a lemon orchard, right? In the Austrian Alps. So you see a lemon tree in the most optimum area with special extra care and things like that, so they can go, wow, look, a lemon, right? And I think that we get seduced by this in our space, to where I want to have that thing that no one thinks can be done and prove that it can be done. And I did it to a degree. I mean, I grew satsumas here for like 5 seasons, and they lived. It's a kind of cold, hardy citrus, like an orange, like a tangerine orange thing. And they did okay. And then we got one of those winters. And there's just, and I cover them, and there's just nothing you can do because you're sitting wide ass open. And the other thing that you're dealing with for like this particular thing we're talking about, if you're in these temperate climates, you have this temperature that comes down really slowly over time in a very typical seasonal cycle of ebbs and flows, of highs and lows. Like, it'll get as hot in parts of Montana as it'll get in Texas, but it'll take a long time to get there, and then it kind of levels off and comes back down, and it's nice and dry, so you don't feel like you're going to die. Where we can have one day in Texas that's below zero, and the next day is 85 degrees. And we can also have days like consistently in the 80s and 70s for lows. And then have a week where we start to cool off and we're having lows in the 50s, and then go from the 50s down to 5 degrees for a low. We just did it, not quite that extreme, but we had not had a day that was even close to freezing. And we had a couple weeks leading up to Christmas where average temperature during the day was in the 80s, overnight lows were in the 60s. And then it was 19 degrees 4 days later. So when you look at something like growing an orange or a lemon here versus Austria, it seems like, well, it would be easier to do here than there. Maybe. I'm not Seb Holzer. I don't claim to be. And I also can't get deep soils to protect the roots because of rock and stuff like that here. Most of my property is less than a foot of dirt, and then it's slab rock. It's like growing on a concrete parking lot. So that makes it a little harder. But again, even Sep, you're not going to see him growing, he's not growing orchards of lemons for market. He does this magic trick, right? It's magic. Look what I can do. Like, just to show that it can be done. Let's set it up so that the ponds are reflecting the sun and we're creating a solar thing. And that's very, very cool. But I don't think it's really the smartest thing. I talked about my grandfather in the beginning of this for those that were here for it. And, growing up, like I said, we didn't garden as a hobby. We didn't garden because it was cool. We didn't garden because we were hippies. We gardened because we were freaking, to be blunt, we were poor. I'm the son of a bootleg coal miner from central Pennsylvania. Let me say that again. I'm the son of a bootleg coal miner from central Pennsylvania. And he is the son of a Ukrainian immigrant bootleg coal miner who settled in central Pennsylvania. This is not exactly a demographic of the wealthy. Okay? It isn't. So when we gardened for subsistence. I went fishing a lot as a kid. I loved to do it. No one ever had to twist my arm to do it. But there was an expectation that if I spent all day on a Saturday screwing off and I said I was going fishing, then it didn't have like some, overarching evil grandparents that were like, because you had a bad day, you're in trouble. But there was a reasonable expectation that when I came home, there'd be a stringer full of fish. And that I would take the step of filleting those fish or gutting them or whatever and freezing them or whatever needed to be done so that day's efforts, even if a couple of them got ate that night, there was some extra that got put aside so that when we were in winter and it wasn't so easy to get fish, there was some fish in the deep freeze. Or if it was early in the year and they were trout, they would smoke well or something like that. We went hunting. It was for food. And this is the Survival Podcast. So even though I think it's cool that we do all these kind of odd, weird, pretty colors, great flavors, and we should do it, we should also try to do it from a stance of, if I have to take care of it like a baby when it's fully grown, it's a hobby. And if it's something that's supposed to sustain me, once I get it to a certain point, maybe it needs a little irrigation or something like that, but it should just grow. And when I want some, I should go home and I should eat it. And I think that even though I kind of made some jokes about it in the beginning here with, I'm an addict and the seed catalog crack dealer and all. And I say every year I'm going to grow the 8 to 12 things that do well for us that we use a lot of. And I end up doing this. I want to be clear, I do this too. I do grow the stuff that produces well for us. I grow the hell out of peppers. I grow the hell out of eggplant. I grow the hell out of Chinese noodle bean. I grow the hell out of herbs like sage and basil and things like that. I don't grow a lot of carbohydrate crops because we don't really eat them much anymore. We've encouraged so much with like wild herbage and things that can be foraged here on the property. We forage a lot of things we don't even think about growing. For about 3 weeks every year, we have an amazing privilege, in my opinion, that we get to eat black locust flower blossoms. And they taste like sweet, then they taste like pea, and then they taste like nothing. It just kind of like this sweet pea flavor, and then it just vanishes. And we throw them in our salads and things like that. Well, I didn't grow the locust trees for the blossoms. That was like, oh, look, here's something we can harvest. I have traveled a lot around the southern United States, and wherever I go in the summer, early summer and late spring, I will always see different varieties of wild garlics growing with little seed heads on them. And I always just get as much of that as I can, and I bring it home. I just throw it around my property. I know that 95% of it is going to go away and die and not grow or get eaten by a duck, but the little bit it does is going to add to that diversity. We harvest pepperweed off the property in the spring, and we grow watercress in the aquatic systems. It's as simple as just throw a handful of seeds in. Like, we need to be thinking this way in addition to all these kind of cool things. And then the best thing to do when we're finding the cool things is then find the cool. The reason I'll do 15 is to find 2 or 3 this year that I can add to that list of things that we use a lot of that does well. It doesn't need a lot of attention. And that is taking the idea that, when times are good, we can have all this fun, but then that fun is reinvested by keeping good records, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work, and not just what works and doesn't work, but where does it do well? I do have a lot of bed space and all, so I'll probably grow some of those wasabi radishes in my aviary in a wicking bed under shade cloth. And I'll grow some in kind of my perennial beds interplanted, and I'll grow some of my regular vegetable beds. And I have some that get more sun and less sun, and I'll see where they do well. And I might find that they do really, really well in area A early, and area B in midsummer, and area C in the fall. And just getting a little notebook or something and keeping records like this, so that if you ever actually get to the point where, like, you're doing what I did growing up, because we do get a lot of our food from our ducks and our plants and from our fish farming and all that stuff, and from foraging, but we don't have to. We do it because it's delicious, it's nutritious, it's wonderful, it's a better way to live in good times, but we also do it because we don't want the skill set and the knowledge set that allows it to be possible to atrophy. Because that's what's happened to our country, guys. When I was growing up as a kid, the stuff that I'm talking about every day when I talk about growing your own food, if you went and said, I'm going to do a workshop on this or a presentation on this, no one would have showed up. Everybody said, I know, dummy, I got the same garden you do in my yard over here. Everybody knew how to do what was easy for them. They didn't know all types of things, but they knew Pennsylvania, you throw a tomato on the ground, kick dirt over it, tomatoes will grow. Right? I mean, they knew that. So everybody grew tomatoes because it was easy to do. It was a calorie crop. There's a bunch of different ways to use them. So everybody grew tomatoes because everybody knew that. Today, you give a person the best place in the world to grow a tomato, give them the best tomato seeds known to man, the best organic fertilizer possible, and a book, and they may not be able to grow a tomato. Because we like a patient who ends up in a coma in a bed for 6 months before they come back around. We have to learn to walk again as a species. These things, this idea of man and plant life, whether it's perennial or annual, and livestock and natural systems and wild game and domesticated animals as well, us living together in a symbiotic relationship is as natural as it gets. And everything in our society, and I didn't know I'd end up talking about this at the end today, but everything in our society is attempting to divorce us from that reality. Instead of saying, hey, if you're going to eat beef, there's a cow. That's where your beef comes from. You need to learn to be spiritually at peace with that and make sure that that cow has a good life right up until graduation day. And you should be buying that beef from someone down the road from you. You want to convince people it's more environmentally friendly to grind up soybeans and beets into a fake burger and call it impossible. And that's why it's called impossible, because that's an impossible way for the human species to live. We cannot fucking live that way, guys. I'm sorry. We can't. There's a show called Yellowstone, and there's a scene in it where a guy's dealing with like a protesting vegan chick, and he says, have you, I don't remember the exact quote, but it's like, have you ever plowed a soybean field or a corn field? Do you know what you have to do? You have to kill every single thing in that field to grow that food. Every rat, every mole, every vole, every organism has to die. We don't have to do that shit. All the stuff I talked about growing today doesn't require that. In fact, it can actually make the overall environment for the health of insects and animals better. If you talk about your carbon footprint, how much do you think your carbon footprint is when you're eating rice grown in frickin' China and soybeans grown in frickin' Missouri and you live in Florida? And how much death occurred to move that plant to you? Well, we can grow these things ourselves. We can grow these things locally. And what it involves to be able to do it the right way is the type of shit we're talking about today, where we're willing to experiment and fail. We're willing to say, I spent $5 on these seeds. I planted them and they all died. Now, either I did something wrong or that plant doesn't belong here. So maybe I'll try it one more time. Okay, that didn't work well. Maybe I'll talk to my master gardener neighbor or something and see if she's ever heard anything about it. And if that's, then I'll just grow something else. And I'll keep figuring out what to do to be able to grow the things that I like, that my family will eat, that we can use, that help us, that are easy to grow. And that is why I've always said this for years and years and years, since I first heard it said by my late friend Toby Hemingway. Man is not an agricultural species, but we are a horticultural species. Agriculture is the culture of fields. It is where we plow a field and we destroy and kill everything in that field. That's what agriculture is. It means the culture of fields. Horticulture is the culture of plants, where we team with plants as allies to produce foods, fibers, and medicines for ourselves and for our livestock. And for animals that are just here, that are beneficial to us or neutral to us or even somewhat of a pest. You can't grow the kind of diversity we talked about today, do that for years, find the things that work well and keep doing that, and give a damn that some leaf miners ate some holes in your eggplant leaf. You just don't care anymore. And that means that the prey is there, so the predator species come and they control the predator. Instead, our take on modern agriculture is we spray the hell out of it and we kill everything, and then we wonder why we create super pests and there's nothing there to eat them. Think about it this way. How many wildebeests have to exist in the plains system of an African area to support one pride of lions? If you have a pride of 15 lions and you have 15 wildebeests, and that's it. That's all there is for the lions to eat. How long is it going to be before there's no lions? Or they're going to start eating people? And the answer is not very long. A couple weeks. You have to have thousands of wildebeest. And you know, when I say wildebeest, I mean just plains game in general, right? Like impalas, wildebeest, zebras, etc. You have like 1,000 animals and kind of a herd grouping to about a pride of lions. And if you do that, the plains game will never overgrow their ecosystem because the predators will keep them in check. And the predators will never die out because they'll have something to eat. That's horticulture. It's just at a much smaller level. We're talking about ladybugs as lions and aphids as wildebeests. If you kill all the aphids, how can you expect to have ladybugs that need aphids to eat? You can't do it. That's what we're talking about today. I know it was just a list of plants, but that's what we're really talking about today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I know I didn't do a lot of question and answer and stuff today like that. We'll try to do more of that interaction on Friday with the show we're going to do on Friday, which will be an Outback with Jack. And it should be actually Outback this week. Tomorrow, I've got Kat from Anarchapulco coming on. She's going to talk to us about Anarchapulco. I got the Expert Council show, so that won't be live streamed. I've not done that yet anyway. But we'll have an Expert Council show Thursday. And I thank all of you for being here with me today. And because I didn't get to do a lot of interaction, guys, I will, if anybody wants to throw something at me here, I'm not recording for the audio podcast now, but I'll give it a moment or two. And if you want to throw something in all caps for me, I'll comment on it. Or I'll sign off either, or I'll give a little bit of time for things to catch up. It's a pretty good feed. We had about 110 people on average just from YouTube. If you're on Twitter and seeing this, yeah, I'm streaming. I figured out I can do that for StreamYard too without going there. So it's kind of cool. If you're watching this on Facebook, if you want to interact with me, you need to get over to MeWe or Float or something like that. And otherwise, the live streams will come over there. And I can't see everybody's comments streamed into StreamYard. If you want to comment to me, it's going to be best to be doing that on YouTube. I don't see anybody dropping anything in all caps in. So I guess we'll let that end it. I do want to say something though here real quick with these live streams. The fact that some of you take an hour out of your day to spend with me and contribute that way to this show means a lot to me. I really appreciate it. Thank you for being here. And I know a lot of you pop in for 20 or 30 minutes and jump out and then come back in, or, they're gone for the day and you only get a piece of it and then maybe listen to the audio. Thank you for that too, man. I mean, usually what I see is we find kind of a number and you see people kind of come out and come back in when I'm looking at the number count. So I really, really do appreciate that. So we do have a couple questions coming in. Any experience growing Mormon tea, which is an ephedra? It produces ephedra, I guess. I've never grown it. I have to say I don't really know anything about it. Heavy Metal says, will Nick Ferguson be back anytime soon? Nick Ferguson blew up his computer, and I informed him today that there's apps for iPhones that would allow him to record expert counsel answers. So hopefully when I get off, he's got a few in the tank. And I would love to have Nick back on with some expert counsel segments. Maybe we need to have him on just for an interview or just a discussion again soon. Jim says, might be an expert counsel question, but how to manage apple tree pollination, creating a loop of varieties. That's something I don't know a ton about. I did try to kind of get into the apple growing world when I moved here. I really wanted to grow cider apples, and this property, this is kind of some of the stuff we were talking about. It just isn't right for it. I don't think the climate's the problem. It's that for apples to do well in our climate, we need deep soils, right? We can have perfect climate, shallow soil, or we can have not so perfect climate and deep soil, but not so perfect climate and shallow soil is a no-go. But what I can tell you, Jim, about that is that, number one, you probably shouldn't overthink it, okay? But there are charts that say, like, these apples bloom at the same time. The people that I've talked to locally, there are some people locally that do well growing apples. They do three main things. One, they do put some thought into their varieties and having some overlap in blooms. Two, they grow crab apples. And they grow two or three, like a dogo crab apple and some other crab apple. They grow a couple of those so for every 20 apple trees, they grow a crab apple. And then for every 40, they grow, two different crab apples. Number three, they propagate from seed and grow, again, about 1 to 20 of like just random everyday apples. And if those apples are decent for cider or for something, then they use them. And if not, it's just an extra tree. And that way you end up with a lot of diversity and variety and a lot of potential for cross-pollination. That is something you do have to put some thought into. We're happy you interact with us. Well, thank you for that, Dawn. Awesome show today. Thanks for all you do. From Justin. Thank you, Justin. Jasmine says, I like the midday live streams. I watch you while I work out. Thank you. Well, hey, thanks for tuning in. I appreciate that. I try to kind of set the times at different times for the live streams. My guest host live streams are going to be 12:30 Central. That's just when we do the guest interviews. If I do a live stream kind of variety show on Mondays, it's going to be early. If I do it on Friday, it's definitely going to be early. That's why we do the live ones on Friday early. But I try to give, each week some variety because I know some people are free at different times of the day. I think that, let's see, might it be possible to do aquaculture in a spring-fed pond? The water temperature never rises above 60 degrees in the summer. From Steve. Yeah, probably not. What that would be excellent for, though, is for wicking beds. And that would actually be really advantageous because if you did wicking beds and kind of played around with it and you had enough water table and then enough soil that the plants don't get waterlogged, but you're still getting that effect, you'd have a root cooling system. And a lot of times plants can handle a lot more heat than we think they can on their leaves as long as they have enough moisture to be able to transpire and deal with it, plus keeping that root zone cool. The problem with trying to do aquaculture I don't care if it's a spring-fed pond, I don't care what, it doesn't have to do with the temperature. You basically have water with almost no nutrient. So if we're taking water from the pond and bringing it to the plant back to the pond, which would be, the easy way to do things, the plant's not going to get enough nutrient. And if we're adding nutrient, then we're adding nutrient to our pond. So you kind of see what the issue there is. Now, he also didn't say hydroponics or aquaponics. He said aquaculture. So if we're talking about emergent vegetation, that might be great. So, what that makes me think of is the fact that a lot of people think of rice as a plant that's grown in the South, but there's a lot of alpine rice that's grown. Ben Falk grows rice every year in freaking Vermont. If you go to the survivalpodcast.com and search for rice and scroll through a few things, I'm sure you'll find cold climate rice. I would do rice with Ben Falk, rice Ben Falk on the show. You should be able to find that episode. So rice would be something that could be grown in an emergent environment. I have found that water chestnut does very good even in cool climates up to a point. I've had people say that they have had water chestnut over winter in zone 6 if planted deep enough. So those would be some things that you could look at there, Steve. Suggestions for seeding a forest floor surrounded by woods with understory fairly well cleared out. Toger's asking that. That's probably going to grow back well for you on its own. Forests don't tend to leave glades open for very long. So if there is something you want to grow in that glade, you probably need to get it in there. However, you're probably not, unless you're going to somehow mechanically or biologically keep the glade open, seeding's probably not what you're looking at. You're probably looking more at like plants, or we're seeding trees. If you're going to graze it, then the animals are really your answer. Right. Every time you graze it, hit it with that, whatever. Like if you want to grow like middle pasture glade surrounded by forest, maybe that'll work. But I'm not really clear on the question there. Any good use for tons of flower seeds? The guy had any good use for tons of flower seeds? The guy giveaway leftovers. I think there's a double post in there, but tons of flower seeds. Throw them out in the ground and see if they grow. If they're free. And you'll find that some look for areas where, you want the flowers, raking up soil and all will get you better germination rates. But I've done that as well. Maybe have a little dedicated bed just as a wildflower bed. Suggestions for seeding or planting or growing edible mushrooms. I am a mushroom failure. I quit. I give up. It's too hot. It's too dry here. I've not been able to do it. I do have some shows on growing mushrooms. You can go to the survivalpodcast.com, search for mushroom, and you can find some of the shows. I've had some cultivators on. I think it's a very specialized thing, and I think unless your climate is ideal, it's an indoor proposition. I've had people say, Trad, I can't think of his last name, Trad something, pretty switched on mushroom guy, say it's as easy as get a bucket full of coffee grinds and tear up an oyster mushroom from the grocery store and stick it in there and you can grow oyster mushrooms. Maybe he can. I have not been able to do it. I have failed at every mushroom growing attempt that I've ever made. And it makes me sad because I love mushrooms. And growing up in Pennsylvania, we never even thought about growing a mushroom. They just grew. We had mushrooms pop up around the garden and stuff. And I'm sure now, knowing what I know now, if I'd gotten some spawn of certain varieties, and I could have encouraged that more. But we would, we just go forage for morels and matakis, which is known as a hen of the woods. It's a beautiful mushroom. Even puffballs, chanterelles, and stuff like that. Like they were just mushrooms. Yeah, Jasmine is saying morels grow here in the wild. Yeah, mushrooms are a temperate climate, cool climate, moist climate plant. Anyway, or that's not really a plant, right? Fungus. Anyway, with that, guys, I appreciate y'all tuning in. I am going to wrap up so I can get the intro and outro done for the audio and get that up on the site. Remember, as always, you can always find all the resources and links. Tons of audio podcasts. This is 3,008 episodes that we've done as of today. So there's 3,007 episodes on everything you can think of available at the survivalpodcast.com. Peace out all. I will catch you later.